Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Completed Life Lunch Hour series. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're delighted that you're here. My name is Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel, and I'm the Program Director for the Completed Life Initiative. Our Lunch Hour series is a chance to have an up-close and personal discussion with our Completed Life experts. Today's lunch hour features guest speaker, esteemed Lonny Shavelson, MD, who will be presenting on the myths of medical aid in dying and the lessons that can be learned at the bedside. I'm also delighted to welcome back our esteemed moderator, Delano Kopru, who is an incredible member of our Completed Life Advisory Board and a scholar in his own right on American literature and poetry and Shakespeare. So Delano, it's always a delight to welcome you back. Thank you both so much for being here today. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Delano to begin your opening remarks.
It is with exceeding joy and deep gratitude that we welcome Lonny Shavelson to the Completed Life Initiative Lunch Hour series. Dr. Shavelson founded Bay Area End of Life Options in 2016. He has worked for 29 years as an emergency department physician. Then for 7 years, he served as a primary care physician in a clinic for immigrants and refugees, follow up with 4 years specializing in medical aid in dying, before closing his practice in August of 2020. Dr. Shavelson is now the chair of the American Clinicians Academy of Medical Aid in Dying and a consultant and educator for physicians working with aid in dying patients. Dr. Shavelson also leads trainings about California's End of Life Option Act. His groundbreaking 1995 study titled A Chosen Death remains required reading for the study of end of life options. Just one quick note of housekeeping before we begin. For this particular lunch hour, Dr. Shavelson has asked that as questions arise, please feel free to speak freely and ask him directly. He welcomes that type of exchange for this particular venue. However, as always, if you would prefer to use the chat, I will be also happy to address our questions to Dr. Shavelson as well. So without further ado, please join us in welcoming Dr. Lonny Shavelson to the Completed Life Initiative Lunch Hour series. Dr. Shavelson, over to you, sir.
Hi, Lonny. Go ahead and unmute, please. Here you go.
Yeah, I couldn't see to do that myself, so thank you, whoever just unmuted me. That's the classic error to make on this, so I'll start off with the classic error, and we'll work from there. Just a quick thing, if you do want to ask questions because I'm saying something really, really irking or important to you during my presentation, then sure, speak up and interrupt if you can. But otherwise, just wait until the end, and then we'll have a really good flowing conversation, and truly a conversation, I hope. I'm going to go share my screen now, and hopefully that will work. And that should have been there, and make my PowerPoint presentation. Slideshow, play from current slide, and full screen. And I think that now we are there, so if anybody doesn't see what I'm seeing, let me know. Okay, I'm going to be talking today very differently than the way I usually do a presentation, which is really about medical aid in dying, and how it works, and the pharmacology and the sociology and the law and how it all puts together. And because I'm speaking to such a really wonderful and I think sophisticated audience who's thought through a lot of these issues, I rejiggered things completely, and I want to talk about the myths, some of the myths about medical aid and dying, because I think you all probably have some of the basics. But to just be clear, when I use the term medical aid and dying, I'm a blunt guy. What I mean is when patients who are terminally ill take medications to die. That's what that term means. You've all heard death with dignity, physician-assisted suicide, et cetera, but I use the term medical aid in dying, and you will see shortly why. The question is, have we learned anything at the bedside? It's now been about 24 years since Oregon passed its law and started doing medical aid in dying in the United States, and then year by year more places have come along. California has had active medical aid in dying practice for close to 5 years now. And so the question is, what have we learned at the bedside? We've looked at this from an ethics point of view, a legal point of view, a moral point of view. We've looked at it from every point of view we can, and very, very few people talk about bedside care, actually caring for patients who are considering medical aid in dying. So here I am, and I'm going to talk about the myths about it. Let's go see if I'm in the right place and I can make that slide move. There it is. So just by way of introduction, from 2016 to 2020, I was the lead physician with 2 other practitioners and then with just 1 other practitioner, our nurse, Thalia DeWolf, of Bay Area End of Life Options. This was a unique medical practice that was focused specifically on patients who are considering medical aid in dying. Pay attention to that word considering, please, because that is an important word that I'm going to be talking more about. What did that do? Why can't I change slides the other way? Okay. Very, very briefly, our practice had about 412 patients out of 2,000 or so who approached us, and we distributed to other clinicians in various ways. But in that green box on the right is the most significant thing. We attended, and we were at the bedside, which is also a bit unusual, and I'll talk more about, at the bedside for 236 patients as they took medications to die, and we took care of them before, during, and after that process, which gives us probably the largest database and experience and learning from our patients of any practice in the United States that has been doing medical aid in dying. The numbers are usually much lower. We wanted that extensive an experience, and over time we were able to do that. I'm going to change around now a little bit and redo my camera position and talk to you about a poet. And so Hannah Block is a poet that I met. She was terminally ill when I met her at her poetry reading called Dying for Dummies. At the time, a cancer was eating up the bones and muscles in Hannah's leg, and here she is in a brief excerpt from a film about that poetry reading. So here comes the film, if the technician gods are with us. No, they're not. All right, let's make this shorter. How can I do? There we are. Okay.
My father died of lung cancer in 1971. During the time that he was dying, we never mentioned the fact that he was dying. We never used the word cancer. And I decided that it's going to be different for me, and to write about what the end of life issues are. Just not like my father, deranged in lung and limb, slamming his arm against the mattress to hurt the pain, he said. Ever since I was diagnosed, writing poetry kept me sane. Then I had the thought that it would be useful to share it with, especially with older people who are asking the same questions I am and who are going to be facing the same things a little bit down the road. I remember the day very well. When I was diagnosed with an aggressive sarcoma, 2-pound tumor in my leg, I thought it was a muscle. I started writing poems again, and all of a sudden there was a burst of creativity, the last thing I expected. There's nothing like a deadline. Dying for Dummies. I used to study the grown-up kids. They'd show and tell me how to wiggle my hips, how to razz the boys. Now I'm watching my cohort master the skills at each grade level of incapacity, and get promoted to the next. To the oldest, I'm still a novice. These 75-year-olds, they think they know everything, says cousin Leo. He's 90. Who thinks, Leo? Who knows? We're too busy reading Gratitude and Being Mortal and passing around the revised edition of Dying for Dummies. One cohort, one body, one book of words, we confess to each other, and the young study us.
Okay, and so, back to my PowerPoint. Hannah insisted when I met her that she knew exactly how she would die, from a lethal medication by medical aid in dying. And it didn't happen that way. And a year after Hannah died, I was asked to speak at a showing of her film, and I realized I needed Hannah's help. So I wrote to her, a letter to a dead poet, and I read it to the audience. And I'll read it now to you all to clarify how medical aid in dying is about so much more than taking lethal medications. Dear Hannah, we met at your poetry reading, then talked a lot about your plans to take a poison potion when you approach death. Do you remember telling me, I'm very aware of trying to create a good death for me and for my husband and sons, to show them a good death is possible. Hannah, think of that responsibility. Your death became another of life's obligations, a self-imposed requirement to have a good death for others as much as for you. I'd heard that a lot from my patients. This strange new good death obligation is a side effect of the new right to choose how and when you will die. But you only get one chance to dying right. No rehearsals, no rewrites. And a death under your complete control is not possible. No legislatively permitted lethal medications have made death not death. And although you clearly wanted a lethal medication for your death, that didn't change your will to live longer. You said, once my cancer was declared incurable, treatments became my way to buy time. Having more time is always good, isn't it? And so I found you months later, severely ill in the hospital. You said you were there for more treatments to slow the cancer, to gain strength, to walk again. And then you'd go home. You were so filled with hope for more time, for less death. I explained that the treatments they were offering were highly unlikely to make you walk again. It was more likely that you would die in the hospital. You might think, I said, about just going home, facing the now inevitable in your own bed. You said you'd think about it, talk with your husband and sons, and I left you there, still hopeful, tethered to wires and IVs, in a hospital bed. You had bragged that your oncologist is also a jazz singer. Jazz is a hopeful sort of music, an improvisation that relies on faith. So is oncology. And you had joined your oncologist in an improvisation of hope. But now you chose to go home, to improvise the ending, your last poem, your final song. And as you cherished every moment of life, thoughts of that poison potion evaporated. In spite of years of thoughtful planning for aid in dying, you played the final notes as they came to you. You found death peacefully, no poisons involved. Your death was not a prescripted event. Do you fear, Hannah, that you copped out? that after talking so much about taking medications to die, in the end, you didn't do it? Do you think that somehow you got this wrong? That instead of taking a 4-ounce cocktail of death, you insisted on every last ounce of life until, well, you simply died. But wasn't that the good death you were after? Dignified deaths come in so many ways, and you don't know which route yours will take until it happened. How you die is not a political statement of policy preferences. It's your death. Does this sound like I am not in favor of the so-called right to die or death with dignity or the more accurately described medical aid in dying? Of course not. I do it all the time. I offer patients the 4-ounce potion when they decide they have reached the end, not an ounce of good life left in them. But the supporters of death with dignity at times get confused. They think they have some monopoly process on a dignified death. But thinking that is, well, undignified. There are so many ways to die with dignity, and you, Hannah, found yours. So let's dispel a myth about medical aid in dying. That it is the best way to die, the dignified way to die. The way that you show yourself and your children that you still have control. But the path to death, Hannah, is never by any means certain. Because in death, like in jazz, you don't know the final notes until the song has ended. So I would like my patients to learn from your lesson, to think about death, to talk about death, to face death head on, and to make plans. But in the final moment, listen to the song your particular death is singing and improvise the ending, because you won't know what that ending will be for you and your death until that last note is played. With love and gratitude, Lonny. I read you all this letter to a dead poet because I constantly remind myself that although I'm an aid in dying doctor, I'm not advocating for medical aid in dying. I am here to accept the many routes terminally ill patients have to their deaths. Aid in dying is now certainly one of them, and as you might guess, I think it's really important. But we who practice aid in dying have no monopoly on death and dignity. My role is to dance while my patients lead until their song has ended. That may mean providing medications for them to die, or not. I'm only responding to patients' independent desires, and those appropriately change as death approaches, even with the best of plans. So understanding medical aid in dying, I think, is always to maintain this larger perspective. The point is, we are doctors, not just aid in dying doctors, and we provide care as people die, not just medications. Okay, so let me return my camera to its rightful place, so I'm not reading things to you, and talk about these myths about medical aid in dying. What have we learned at the bedside? And to describe this a bit further, these myths about medical aid in dying are the controversial, somewhat provocative opinions of a gray-bearded man. This particular gray-bearded man is speaking to you not from Mount Olympus, but from Berkeley, California, where I am at this moment. The major myth, in my opinion, is what I refer to as misery versus mercy. There has come to be, over the years, this idea that death is a miserable experience, that it's filled with pain, nausea, vomiting, weakness, immobility, and that the only choice you have is to die a life of misery or to have mercy, which is we in the medical aid in dying group have sort of claimed this role of being the merciful route. You take medications to die, within an hour or two you are dead, you avoid all of that misery of mercy, and this is how we have promulgated the idea of medical aid in dying, Because if we don't convince the public, in this particular case, I'm talking about the advocates, the political advocates for medical aid in dying who passed these laws. If we don't convince them that death is filled with misery, then why would they vote for mercy and the right to medical aid in dying? So there's this dichotomy, this very false dichotomy that has been presented, which is that you have two choices, misery versus mercy, when indeed there is an enormous spectrum of how to die with dignity and how to die well, that between misery and mercy, you get thousands, if not millions, of choices for your particular death, and you follow those lines, not in this very overly simplistic myth of the choices are between misery and mercy, misery versus mercy. So here, how did all this happen? Here's an 89-year-old female patient of mine with melanoma. This melanoma has spread from her skin into her liver, and she says to me, I watched my father die of cancer, and it was horrible. I will not die like that, so I am calling you for medications to die. Assuming that her death, of course, will also be horrible, and her other choice is to take medications to die, which is medical aid in dying, which is now legal in 11 states in this country. And so let's kind of look at that a little bit. She's 89 years old. When I talked with her, and when someone comes to me and says, I want medications to die, the first thing that we do is we have a nice conversation about, well, what's that about? And in talking with her, I realized that she watched her father die some 45 years ago. And she's thinking of the process of death as if it hasn't changed at all in 45 years, as if the entire field of palliative care and hospice care had not evolved tremendously during that time. And her death would be just like her father's because those were the choices. So she chooses mercy, which is medical aid in dying, and she wants me to give her medications to die, which I will, of course, do if she wants them. But my job first is to really understand how does she see her death and provide her with information about how in the modern world of medicine her death may occur. And then we're going to talk about various choices. And if she wants medications to die, well, sure, that's what I do. But I also want to educate patients to be sure that they're understanding what is death actually like, especially in their individual circumstance. So let's look at this. 68-year-old female calls me. She has leukemia, and she is requesting medications to die because she doesn't want to have a painful death. And so we chat for a while, and I ask her, has anybody ever told you that people with leukemia don't die painful deaths? That leukemia is a death of bone marrow failure where you become anemic and you gradually weaken and gradually fade into a coma and then die over a period of time, and you almost never have severe pain? And she said, no, I've not been told that. And indeed, when we talked it out and I said, you're asking me for medications to die to avoid a painful death, I can reassure you that you are extremely unlikely to have a painful death. But what about your thoughts about this fade away to maybe a prolonged coma and then a gradual death from coma where you fade away into death? Does that bother you at all? And she said, no, that sounds fine. And when we talked it through, there really was only pain that she was afraid of, and that was the end of the conversation. She no longer wanted medications to die. And we gave her information that was helpful in her making plans. Now, again, I believe in the right to medical aid in dying. Had she asked me for medications to die because of even her fears of a painful death, and she felt that that was important to her, that's what I would have done. But first, I provided information, not myths, information. And she was able to move on from there. Fact. Dying in pain is the most common fear about dying. When you interview people and take surveys and all that, and you ask people what are they afraid of, what their death might be, the vast majority say, I'm afraid I may die in pain. And that would lead you to the conclusion that pain then must be the most common reason that patients ask to take medications to die. And so when thinking this through, it turns out that pain, excuse me for 1 second. It turns out that pain is the most common reason, is not the most common reason that patients ask to take medications to die. The most common reason is fatigue. In fact, in my experience, I almost never have a patient tell me that I'm ready to die now because I'm in severe uncontrollable pain. How do I know that? We have data from virtually every state that talks about why people take medications to die, every one of the legal states. And if you look at this list, this is from Oregon, but it's pretty much replicated in most states. Way down the list of why people decide to take medications to die is this inadequate pain control that's highlighted. And so the myth of inadequate pain control being the cause of death, of why people take medications to die, is just that. It's a myth. They do it because of decreased ability to enjoy life, loss of autonomy. You can go down the list. But in general, we have become so good between hospice and palliative care about taking care of patients' pain, that pain, while it may be their most significant fear, by the time they get to picking a date or deciding if they want medications to die, it's lowest on their list. The most common reason patients choose a date to die, in my experience, is fatigue and exhaustion. And so when I talk to patients, and this is important the way I phrase that, choose a date, this is where people have been given the right to have medications to die, and now they have that difficult decision: do I want to do it this week or next Tuesday or the week after? Do I want to wait more time to see my grandchildren again, or to watch the Super Bowl, or whatever might motivate you? The decision of choosing a date is a complicated one, but the thing I hear always when somebody says, you know, doc, come help me next Tuesday, I am just so tired, I'm done. And I wait until I hear that expression, I'm done, because that's when I know it's become real. And that's when they really ask me to come and help them die. Myth. Medical aid in dying is the same as death with dignity. We have started using the term death with dignity and medical aid in dying as if they are interchangeable. How do I know this? Well, here are a couple of examples. Maine, death with dignity. The Washington Death with Dignity Act. Death with dignity, my life, my choice. And I can go on, I don't mean to pick on Maine and Washington. Every single state that has legalized medical aid in dying has used the term death with dignity interchangeably with medical aid in dying, with taking medications to die, as if the possibility of a dignified death has now become ours. You can have death with dignity, and that means taking medications to die. And I will tell you that in the realm of dignity, patients have thousands of choices as to how they might find a dignified death. But we, as political advocates, because this is such a good catchphrase, and in politics and passing laws, you need political slogans that work, and this one really does. It's wonderful. But are we implying that other people don't die deaths with dignity? That if a Viking chooses to go off in a burning boat and die on the sea, was that not death with dignity? If a person who is devoutly Catholic follows the Catholic belief that there is resurrection, that there is benefit in suffering, then did that person not follow what they thought was a dignified death? Do we own that term, death with dignity? If somebody chooses to take the route that we generally in society now think is not the best way to die, but somebody chooses to have all the chemotherapy in the world and then be hooked up to a ventilator and live every last moment of life they possibly can, because that's what they believe in, was that not a death with dignity? And yet we have taken the term death with dignity and made it somewhat synonymous with medical aid in dying, and I think we should give it back, because we should not own the concept of dignity and not fool people with the myth that dignity comes through medical aid in dying only. Words matter. Here's how this gets so confusing. 96-year-old Holocaust survivor with pancreatic cancer is weeks from death. He tells his hospice nurse, I want that death with dignity. I've suffered too much in this lifetime. And the nurse says, of course, we'll provide a dignified death. That's what we do in hospice. We're all about dignity. And so the patient is resting at ease, thinking that he's going to have his death with dignity. And you can see where the problem is coming up here. Days from dying, the patient is now, at that stage I talked about, exhausted. And he's ready. And he says to the nurse, I'm ready for that dignified death pill that you promised. And the nurse says, oh, now I understand what you meant. It's too late to set that up. And the patient is furious at the nurse, at his family, at everyone. You betrayed me. After all I've been through of life, I just wanted this death with dignity, and now I can't have it. So as you see, we have complicated things so much by claiming the mantle of a dignified death, making it almost synonymous with medical aid in dying, and I think we need to stop that and understand that dignity is a wide-ranging concept, that misery versus mercy is a fallacy, that there is a huge way to move between those things. And it makes me wonder, and here's where I'm going to get real controversial with you folks. It makes me wonder, have we as political advocates, as people who needed very much so to pass laws about medical aid in dying, which are now called death with dignity laws, have we played up to the politics of fear and misinformation by understandably, but with questionable accuracy, created or fell into or fit into people's fears that their deaths are unavoidably going to be painful or undignified deaths unless you vote for this Death with Dignity Act? And is that a proper thing to have done or to continue doing, to use death with dignity as a way to influence legislators and to be politically expedient and brilliant, I might say, in picking an expression, death with dignity, that so personifies what people are afraid of that they're going to sign for your bill and sign the petition and your legislators will vote for it? Next myth. Take the medications when ready. Why do I use that expression? Because typically when an aid in dying physician, now that you've passed through all the rules and regulations and you're declared terminally ill and you have mental capacity and you've waited your 15 days, the doctor writes you the prescription for the aid in dying medications to be available to you and says, take the medications when ready. As if the decision about what day you will die is kind of like saying, well, I'll have steak for dinner or I'll have salad for dinner. The decision about the date you will die is so complex because might it be too soon to take the medications? Might you not be getting as sick and as much suffering as fast as you think you are? Might you have potential for better pain control, better nausea control, even medications to help your energy and or your depression or counseling? This decision that we have given you is a powerful tool and a wonderful tool to pick the date of your death. But is it best for a doctor to say, take the medications when ready, or to continue working with you on the complexity of that decision? What we do as doctors, we provide information, advice, and reality, and we help you with decisions. We don't make them for you, but take the medications when ready, which is written on your prescription, and that's what you're told by your doctor, is a mythological good practice of medicine. It doesn't exist. So let me play you this video to illustrate this point. There they are. Here comes Mike. This is a patient of mine with ALS. This patient we followed for a period of about 5 or 6 months as he was making that decision of when do I make my death happen.
Michael Holmes. I have ALS.
And I'm Debbie Holmes, Mike's wife. I know we've been talking a little bit about how things have been changing. Why don't you tell me how the past week has been?
I'm progressing. My hand motion has gotten worse. I am literally exhausted.
How is that making you feel about your situation?
It confirms for me that my progression is taking it turned for the worse.
Do you still have some pleasure? Is there still some pleasure left in your life? Tell me about the quality of your life.
That line of pleasure, I've been treading that, trying to find still those bits of pleasure in the love I have for Debbie. I don't want to leave her, but we need to move on because it's going to get more and more difficult day by day.
About a month ago, we were transitioning from living every day and looking for joy in everything we were doing to living every day thinking, are we going to make it to the next day? Just taking a shower, I mean, just wipes him out.
And so I have actually determined a final date. I'm giving myself 3 weeks.
It's not been easy to make the decision to come up with a date to use aid and dying. I don't know how we would know we were in that window to not do it too early and not wait until it was too late without having check-ins.
Candid communication is key with your doctor and a hospice. My death with dignity decision has been the right one for me.
Okay. Apologies, I've been getting some messages that the volume may be enough. I hope that that's improved somewhat with an adjustment I just made. But so just to get into this very, very briefly is that one of the jobs I think in medical aid and dying is that we stay with our patients. We don't just write prescriptions for medications. We take care of their overall end of life process as these complex decisions are being made. A myth, and here I'm going to get into the thick of it. Aid and dying deaths are magically wonderful. That you get these medications and you take them and you slip off gently into eternity and the dove flies out the window. And this is as I've heard about it from Hollywood and the media and many, many people who stop and talk to me about their thinking about medical aid and dying, that it's a celebration of life. And let me clarify that death is sad. That yes, many people who are dying, in the process of dying, have engineered and have celebrations of life. They invite all the family as they're dying from lung cancer weeks beforehand. They invite the family and they talk and say goodbye and they can even drink or sing or whatever. But that doesn't have anything to do with medical aid and dying. You can do that if you're dying of cancer and you're going to slip off to a nice, lovely hospice death. So this celebration of life is what medical aid and dying is about, is another myth, as is the myth that we have created this cosmetically wonderful death. You take a pill, which it's not, you take 4 ounces of a cocktail, and you slowly slip off into oblivion, and it looks wonderful, and everything is fine. And I don't want to be scaring you, but that's not what happens. And so in the process of what we have done in medical aid and dying is we have taken the process of dying, which is that you slowly slip off into unconsciousness over a period of days, and then a number of days or a week or so goes by while you actively die, and you're laying in bed, and then you finally reach the point of death. And we have condensed that to a period of maybe a couple of hours, where we can get you into a coma by taking medications. Within 3 to 6 minutes, you're deeply anesthetized and comatose, and then you die over the next hour or two. But that next hour or two looks very much like what the other death would have looked like, but it's faster. And remember that we have not cosmetically perfected the perfect death. And so, where'd my slide control go? This is Thalia DeWolf, the nurse in our practice and at the Clinicians Academy, talking to other nurses about how you might describe a medical aid in dying death. And here's what she says.
End-of-life breathing can be noisy, like snoring or even gasping. Patients' color can change dramatically. Lips and faces often become bluish, and then they can flush to very pink. Sometimes we see patients' bodies stiffen as they fall asleep, just before they relax completely. Normal breathing can return as patients stabilize, and dying can take some time. Typically 30 minutes to 2 hours, but it can be longer. Find some time to discuss this with those that will be at the bedside.
And so, why do I think it's important to tell you that the patient may turn blue, there may be twitching movements, there may even be seizures, there's some vomiting that sometimes happen, that there's hard breathing, there's sweating, because it's true. And our goal as clinicians is always to provide accurate information, not the mythological bird flying out the window death. Aid in dying is a clinical procedure, and you deserve to know what it's about. And actually, it is quite lovely once you know that when the patient turns blue or has hard breathing, that they are comfortable because they are unconscious, completely anesthetized, and you sit with the family and explain, oh, that gurgling sound you hear, well, that just happens when people die. We haven't been able to change that. Don't worry about it. And why is this so important? Because there is the myth out there that we have created the flawless death. And so what I'm showing you here is a publicly disseminated announcement on the part of a political advocacy organization that is trying to pass laws about medical aid in dying, and thank them for being there. They're doing amazing work, and they have a message to impart that we should pass more laws about aid in dying. So they solicit stories, and here's a story that came out from the granddaughter of a grandfather who had taken medical aid in dying as the way to die. She says, "We stood with my grandpa in a circle around his hospital bed until he passed away in good spirits, almost nonchalantly. I witnessed death as it should be." And so I don't doubt that. I think that this person did experience this death that way, but I will tell you that I personally have never been in a death like that. That deaths in general are not nonchalant. They are sad. There is weeping, keening, just people who are distraught, because guess what happens in an aid in dying death? Someone dies. They often don't die in good spirits. If they were still in good spirits, well, usually they wait until they're really uncomfortable until they choose medical aid in dying. But most importantly to me is this last sentence, I witnessed death as it should be. There is the death with dignity myth once again, is that this person knows that we say, this organization is saying, death as it should be is a medical aid in dying death. Death as it should be. Who are we to tell people that death is as it should be if you do medical aid in dying, and if you don't do it, your death wasn't as it should be? And so why does this happen, this myth of the flawless death that needs to be promulgated? And it's because this is a political organization, again, working with things like the term death with dignity. Donate today. We need money to move this to more states, and damn, more power to you. If that's what you need to do, I'm not sure that it's wrong, but I will tell you that as a clinician, it irks me to be part of an organization or to be represented by people who are creating the myth of the flawless death as a way to make money, to promulgate laws about death with dignity, and the myth of misery versus mercy. And are we being honest with people who are dying? Fact. Medical aid in dying is mostly accessed by affluent, white, highly educated people. This is true, although I'll debate the real accuracy of this data is somewhat debatable, but we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Medical aid in dying is mostly accessed by affluent, white, highly educated people. Myth. These racial disparities are unique to medical aid in dying. People walk up to me all the time when they know I'm an aid in dying doctor, and I've studied it up a little bit, and they say, isn't medical aid in dying mostly accessed it's just for affluent, white, highly educated people? And I will say, yes. But you know what? So is all of the rest of medical care. When you go to an emergency room and you are in need because of chest pain of a coronary angioplasty and you are black, you are 30% less likely to get that angioplasty or even good pain medication. And as you've seen with COVID, we do not have an equitable medical system. The inequality is at the point of systemic racism. And of course, we in medical aid and dying operate in this wide milieu of the medical system we are in the United States of America. And of course, patients get better access to medical aid and dying if they are white, educated, and affluent, because so does everybody else in the medical care system. So in working in that system, let Kay Hudson explain to you. Kay Hudson is the sister of a patient of mine who was dying of ALS. And what Kay Hudson was able to explain to us is that when we come into that, we are so involved in the overall milieu of medical care in the United States that it extrapolates to us, it is part of us, and yes, make no mistake about this, I need to work on this, we need to work on this, everybody needs to work on the fact that there is not equity in healthcare in the United States of America. And we in medical aid and dying are as responsible for the problem as everybody else is, but this is a problem of the system we work in. And let's let Kay Hudson explain that.
I'm Kay Hudson. I'm the sister of Stevie Hudson. He died February the 1st, 2019. When I spoke to my brother about the aid and dying, I was shocked. We are Christians, and I know that, my brother had a relationship with God, and we were brought up, we were raised to, that suicide is a sin. He said, I will never find an area in the Bible where it said men should live by machine. I can only speak for my family as African Americans. It was natural for us to take care of our family members. It never was a burden. It never felt like a burden. Even back from during times of slavery, when the African American structure of the family was broken, we had to look after each other then. And that's how it's been passed down. I never once got tired of taking care of him. But he felt as though the health care gave up on him. Yes, I did believe that my brother had inferior medical care due to his ethnicity, being an African American. He felt like they didn't want to care for him anymore. And then here I am trying to tell my brother, hey, give this a shot. I think what was behind his decision to end his life was he felt as though they kind of like threw their hands up. We had a home health agency, better LVNs that did ventilator care, but they were sent into the white areas. We had one white LVN that came. She went back to that home health and said she was not comfortable in the home. Why you just don't tell the truth? You're not comfortable working with an African American. Even trying to advocate for my brother, I was seen as being aggressive. I was viewed as being angry. And they never really got to know, and during that whole time that I'm advocating for my brother, I'm also in grad school as a social worker. Didn't nobody really know who he was, who we were as a family, what was going on. That's where a lot of the, distrust there's distrust everywhere. I know he was tired of being on the ventilator. He said, I'm done. And he told me no more talking. Although it was Stevie's decision, he felt like there was nothing else left. I would like for all you people at this conference to know, I think it's up to you guys to show that we should or we can trust you.
Let me see if I can back up a second. I can't remember if I missed a slide. We're going to go backwards just to see if I did. No, I didn't. Okay. And so this question of racial disparity, I own it. Medical aid in dying clinicians I know own it. It is a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be fixed by us and worked on by us, and it's a problem that needs to be fixed by the entire medical system in which we work. Let's end on a somewhat positive note, if I may. Myth. Accepting medical aid in dying means you have given up the fight to live. And so I hear this from people all the time, both from the opposition to medical aid in dying to people who are wanting it, is that, oh, you heard you had cancer, you just gave up, you didn't want to face the difficulties of dying, and you just quit, and here you are taking medications to die. And we hear the opposite all of the time, those of us who are doing this on a clinical level. What we hear is medical aid in dying, knowing I can do that, gives me safety to do everything I can to stay alive, knowing that if things get bad, not when things get bad, that's the myth, not when things get painful, that's the myth, but if things go downhill, I know you're backing me up, and I can take medications to die if the battle is lost. So here's Deborah Katzik-Kratter. Deborah was a patient of mine who I met in 2017. She was quite dying of pancreatic cancer. She had clearly, according to every doctor I spoke with, had less than 6 months to live. And she said to me, you know what, I've been offered a clinical trial at Stanford that may give me years more of life, but I'm afraid that if I get so sick in that clinical trial that I will be stuck. So she called me and said, if I am stuck and suffering so much, will you help me die with medical aid in dying? And I said, you know what, we do that all the time. So let me play you what Deborah Kratter has to say.
As soon as I heard about it, that I got the diagnosis, almost step two was trying to get this medical aid in dying in place, because what that enabled me to do is to treat the cancer aggressively, take my chances with this chemo that's so harsh, because I knew that if the chemo made me sick or sicker, I wouldn't then have to suffer, a prolonged basis, or if it didn't work, I wouldn't have to suffer. So this kind of gave me the courage even to proceed. Some people have intractable nausea or weakness or all of these things, and I might have said, why do that if I may have to suffer more, cause my family more suffering, etc. So the Death with Dignity gave me the courage to keep trying, and in some senses gave me the emotional support to do that. And I think that's part of the reason that I have succeeded is I haven't been depressed for these 3 years. It's not like, oh, I'm going to die, because guess what? You can't have a life view that is so afraid of dying. That doesn't flow with me.
Okay, so let me end on a few notes, if I may. Let me be as clear as I can that I have been one of the leading practitioners of medical aid in dying, and I believe in it. I think that for some people, under some circumstances, that the right to choose the moment to end their life is essential to their dignity, because that's what they have chosen and that's what they want. What I think is very important as a doctor, as a clinician, is that we make sure that people really understand what their dying can be about, and that dying with leukemia looks different than dying with brain cancer, and that there are so many ways that you as an individual may die, that my job is to get you the best information possible And the best option of choices that you might possibly have, ranging from pain control to hospice to palliative care to in-hospital death, whatever is possible for you, let's talk about it. And for me, I have the offer on the table to offer to write you a prescription for medications to die and then to stay with you through that process of figuring it out, because it changes over time as you see how your death comes. And all I'm saying about the myths of medical aid in dying is that it is our job to provide accurate information to every one of you about medical aid in dying and about dying in general, so that you can make the best decisions possible. And I think that mythology and misinformation, just like anything else as a political tool, well, we've seen it has its role, but it's not really fair to people who are dying, which, by the way, now includes all of us, as we think about our deaths. So I think that accurate information is the major part of our job as much as anything else that we do. And so thank you for listening to me talk about this mythology, and I'll take whatever questions have come up. Let me stop sharing my screen. All right, I'm back in real life.
Thank you so much, Doctor. There are a few.
Oops, Delano, you got
No,
muted by accident. Sorry about that.
No, all is well. There are a few questions that we do have, but just before we dive into the questions, I do have a couple of questions for you, Lonny. That's okay.
Yeah.
So
I think that's why I'm here.
yeah. Could you take us a little bit into the poem that you wrote, which I thought was quite elegant and very beautiful. And what led you to write that poem, Tahana?
I had a pretty long relationship with Hannah for the last year of her life. We talked. She actually was not my patient. We just talked a lot about her medical aid in dying and how she wanted to die. And she's an amazing poet, fairly well known here on the West Coast. And so as a result of those intense conversations we had, and I'm also a filmmaker, so I was the one who made the film that I was talking about Hannah. And so when it came time to present the film and talk about it, I really wanted to know what Hannah wanted me to say. But she was dead. And so what I could do was write her a letter and say, let's think this through one more time, Hannah, now that you're dead. And that final note has been played, and it was played very differently than you thought it would be played. Let's have another conversation. And so it became the letter to a dead poet. And someday I might know what her answer is when she writes back.
I love that, and we can put you in the company of William Carlos Williams now, as poets, physicians. Just a couple other questions that sort of came up along the way. But first, I do want to commend you for your amazing work of being a writer, journalist, physician, clinician, and just overall person who studies what does it mean to be human. A couple of quotes that came up from what you captured was one from Hannah herself, which I thought was quite moving. We confess to each other, and the young study us. And if we think about, what Mike Holmes mentioned about candid communication is critical with physicians, and just kind of seeing how those two align. And so my question is this: we've had two great voices who've taught us a good deal about what it means to live. In your view, why do these myths persist? And I think you've done a great job here in dispelling some of these myths revolving around medical aid in dying, but why do they persist?
Well, I think the overview of how people see dying through the media, through history, think of plagues and etc. We have hundreds of thousands of years of bad dying, really. People died badly for a long, long time. There were plagues, there were all sorts of bad things that happened, and there was no good medicine to help them through that. And then people who talk to me also watched relatives die badly because death had not really evolved to the good science that it is now, I think, with better palliative care, with better hospice care. So there's a lot of memory going on. And then you look at the fact that fear is a predominant motion in people's lives. They think a lot about what they're afraid of. Not few people sit down and think, oh, I'm sure my death's going to be just fine. Many people have fear of dying, and they pin pain on that, and they pin all that fear on that. And then along we come as a political organization. Before 1997, when Oregon passed the first medical aid in dying, it was actually a year before that, when medical aid in dying was passed for the first time in the United States, this was a political movement. And politics, I wish I could have a better attitude about this, but as we have seen in the last 4 years, politics plays to fear, because then it can fix the fear. And so we've come up, we fit into that dynamic, that dichotomy of misery versus mercy, and we wanted to be on the mercy side, and therefore we confirmed the misery side because it was politically expedient. And I don't want to belittle my colleagues who are political advocates of medical aid in dying. They did an amazing job. It worked. But we were also playing into that fear, misery versus mercy dichotomy. We didn't create it, we just saw it. And we slipped right into it because it worked, and we came up with the name Death with Dignity, and that worked. And off we went into participating in an image of dying that had been built over thousands and thousands of years and has only gotten better for the last maybe 30 or 40. And people are still seeing literature and movies and media and the way their parents died and remembering that. And we have played into that myth, and that myth still exists. And when I then meet a patient, my first job is to say, what are you afraid of? Because often what they're afraid of is a mythological death, an untrue death that the odds are great that it won't happen. And so they're coming to me to escape by taking medications to die, which by definition will shorten their lives. And they're coming to me to escape that fear. And it's my job to work with that and really make sure they understand what's happening here for you as an individual. And so I find these myths to be inconvenient in the very best. And I find that I have to work against them quite frequently. And remember that I'm for medical aid in dying. I'm not the opposition, right? So when somebody says to me, I want medical aid in dying, you'd think that I would say, oh, great. Of course, that's what I believe in. That's what I do.
Yes.
You know, but it's not. What I do is I try to sit down with people and I say, let's talk about your death. That's the job.
Absolutely. I believe the floor is open if there are questions, and we do have a few in the chat, but I do want, if you would like an opportunity to ask your question, now is a good time. So we can pause for about 5 seconds if people would like to jump in. Peggy Batten of Utah. Yes, please.
Peggy, you're muted.
Thanks. There we go.
You're there.
Here I am from Utah. Utah is not as fortunate as California in that it doesn't have a medical aid in dying with statute. But my question, Lonny, is what of your important message and strategies will be useful to people outside the, I think it's now 10 states do have medical aid in dying. So there's a great deal in your message, it seems to me, that's applicable, yes, elsewhere, but I'd like to hear you outline it.
Let me use an example, a story, since you and I both, Peggy, are storytellers. I get requests all the time from somebody, let's use Utah because that's where you are, who says, I'm in Utah and I'm going to move to California for Death with Dignity. And my answer to them is this, you know, you're living in Utah, you're in a hospice, you've got 2 doctors who you really love. You are surrounded by your family in a wonderful home that you've lived in for years. And if you want to die with dignity, stay where you are, stay with your family. Don't get on a plane, move two people that you know to California, live in a hotel room, find new doctors, find new hospice doctors, and call that death with dignity. There are many ways. You're fine. You know, the odds are you're going to have a great death. Find a good hospice, find the best palliative care you can, talk with your doctors, more so, make sure they listen, and talk about your needs. And you know what? You're going to be okay. We did not invent good deaths or death with dignity in 1997 with the first law in Oregon that said there's medical aid in dying. We didn't invent it then. There were people having dignified deaths beforehand, and there are lots of people who don't do aid in dying who are having dignified deaths today. Stay where you are. You'll be okay. And vote for you to get that right so you have one more thing on your menu so that you will eventually in Utah have medical aid in dying. But please don't come to California to live in a hotel room for a dignified death. Does that get at your question at all? You're muted again, Peggy.
You might talk about underground assistance.
I might. You know, it's an interesting thing in my life as a reporter. I spent 4 years in the underground writing A Chosen Death, trying to figure out what it looked like where it was hidden. And there is unquestionably an underground going on, but I don't think we have a pretty good handle on it anymore. Because of the fact that there's the legal practice, everybody is focusing on that. And we used to be able to look, especially in the HIV community, which is now doing so much better because of advances in medication. I think the underground of where doctors are aiding people die illegally, aiding people to die illegally, where family members are overdosing loved ones, as used to happen in the Prohibition days. And I don't really know, Peggy. I don't have a good handle on what's happening in that underground. I'm not sure I've seen a reporter who does, because by the fact that it's an underground,
Right, it's hard to find.
It's hard to find. So I just don't know. I've been so focused on what happens above ground,
Right.
which when I wrote A Chosen Death in 1994, the conclusion was we cannot keep doing this illegally. It's so badly done that it must come above ground, and we must perfect it, and we must improve standards of care and make this a good practice of medicine. That I don't know if anybody's really looking at the underground anymore, and I would imagine it's just as dangerous as it used to be.
Yeah, let's hear from Jay, and thank you for that answer, and thank you for your question, Peggy. Yeah, Jay, are you still with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
And I can start the video. I didn't think anybody cared to see me. No, my question, when we talk about the underground, there is an organization that's very much above ground, and that's Final Exit Network, which advocates for the option, if you so qualify, to use inert gas. And my question was, after hearing the details, the drawbacks with a legalized drug death, is there a place for use of inert gas?
No, and here's why I say no. First of all, we don't really have good data about it, and in the medical field, we don't like to do things that we think that we hear about by hearsay. Secondly, I have heard also by hearsay that these inert gases, helium especially, that there are so many problems with getting the mask to fit right, with it leaking. I've heard of so many failed deaths using it. I don't see how it can be recommended, knowing what we know about inert gases. They fail too often. They cause brain damage if they don't work completely. And so following, I loved Eric Humphrey in his book, Final Exit, but there's a lot of mythology in there too about how easy it is to cause deaths. And I will tell you as an aid in dying practitioner who knows the science, who knows the physiology, I'm a pharmacology nerd, that stopping hearts is much more complex than everybody thinks it is, okay? you can stop a heart by a bullet, but that's not what we're talking about. And you can stop it by asphyxiation. But how comfortable is it? How often does it fail? How often does it cause damage instead? We do not have data, and I, as a clinician, cannot recommend anything for which we have hearsay, but no data, and myths probably rather than reality. And I will tell you that with the pharmacology, at least, we have the data of how it works now. And 92% of people die within 2 hours without complications. We know what's going on with that. So this idea of the illegal practice by using inert gases in places where aid in dying is not legal and assuming it will work, I think is a form of cruelty to patients. We're making up stuff that we don't really understand or know. So that's my answer.
Lonny, I would say you've obviously based your opinion on some data that you think you've gotten from somewhere. Could you forward me that information? I'd like to see it.
The problem is it's not.
Unless you just claim it's hearsay.
No, it's not data. It's hearsay on all ends. The hearsay that it's good is hearsay, and the hearsay that it's bad is hearsay. And that means that I'm in a position of we don't know, and I don't advocate that patients do things we don't know. And so I think we'll have to just leave it at that. That's my clinical opinion about what you asked me.
Okay.
Thank you, Jay, for that great question, and thank you, Lonny, for hanging in there. Lori has a question as well that we would love to hear from Lori.
What was my question? I don't remember now. I asked two questions.
Yes.
What did I ask? Oh, okay. So, well, the first one about, I think about this a lot. Do you recommend patients wait to fill the prescription until they determine with support that they are ready? Wouldn't that prevent wasting the meds and the risk of having them around the house, etc.?
Yeah, there is so much that I didn't even begin to touch upon in this talk because of time and space limitations, and that I would bore you all. I am a firm believer in not doing what used to be done and everybody assumes is done, is you qualify at the end of 15 days and we say, fine, here's the prescription, get the medications delivered to you, you feel better. Everybody tells me, I feel better that having the medications at my side. Let me tell you that these medications include 15,000 milligrams of morphine. And that's a lot of morphine, and we are in the middle of an opiate epidemic, and we don't know who might want to open up that bottle of 15,000 milligrams of morphine sitting for your satisfaction so that you're feeling like you're comfortable knowing that it's there. It's dangerous to have anything that has 15,000 milligrams of morphine in your house. Plus the fact that, by definition, these are lethal medications, right? And then there's the fact that you don't know if you're 3 months from dying whether your death may go to the point where you actually take those medications. And we do have data about this. About 30% of people who get the medications by the bedside don't take them. These medications cost roughly $800. So $800 has been thrown away by 30% of the people. That means that the whole process of medical aid in dying has increased in cost. And then there's the thing is that if you have the medications, and remember I talked about we never say to somebody, take the medications when you're ready. Well, it's very easy for a doctor to say, take the medications when you're ready. If the medications are already at your bedside, then we can bow out of that conversation. But I think it's very important we participate in the conversation. And one way to do that is the patient has to call me to have the medications delivered when they say I'm ready to take them. And you know what happens? Sometimes people say, Doc, I'm ready. My toe hurts so much. I'm ready to take the medications. And I say, you know what, let's fix your toe pain, and then we'll talk about medications to die. And had they had the medications, they would have taken them because they wouldn't have gotten better information. Or they say, you know what, I had a fight with my partner last night. I feel terrible. I'm going to take these medicines. And thank God those medicines weren't there because we want to get them through that social crisis if at all possible. Now, in the end, if a patient calls me and says, I want to take those medications to die, and I say, what's going on that makes that? And they say, because I just had a fight with my spouse, and they insist they want to take the medications. I have an expression. If I disagree with you, you're right. Because in the end, I believe in their autonomy. I just want to have some safety factor so that they don't respond to having a bad day by killing themselves by taking aid in dying medications. And they're going to call me to talk about it. And we're going to have a conversation, and if I think, well, that sounds like a weird reason to take your medications to die today, but if that's what you say, okay, I'm with you. I will back your autonomy. But I really don't think it's a good idea to have lethal medications in people's houses as they're going through a very traumatic part of their life. I think that this idea of participating and offering information and offering help is a good one. And many doctors still prescribe the other way and deliver the medications, and many doctors don't. And we at the Academy are actually really emphasizing, stay with your patients. We have an expression, which is that if you call me on Tuesday and you need to die on Wednesday, we're faster than Amazon. We can get you those medications. They will be at your doorstep tomorrow morning. You don't need them in your drawer, all these lethal medications sitting in your drawer just to feel like you're reassured that you can get the medicines. So when a patient says to me, I need the reassurance of knowing it's there, I tell them, I got your back. I'm with you. You will get those medications when you need them. I just don't think it's necessarily the best idea to keep them in your drawer for 3 months while you figure out when you want to take them. So thanks, Lori, for that question. It's complex, and there's no one easy answer, but that's kind of where we land with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lonnie, on this, on a similar point, in your materials you shared with us, a theme that kind of came up was the notion of I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I've had enough. Edmund asked a very fascinating question about on this very issue. Should we not then allow MAID to those who are simply tired of life?
Well, yes, if you're asking me personally, the answer is a modified yes, because some people might say that they're tired of life because they're 21 and they just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever. So we have to have some way of making sure we're not just dealing with people in a temporary crisis. But sure, I get the tired of life argument, but here's the deal. I am a practicing clinician in a state that allows medical aid in dying under certain circumstances. And my job is to provide medical aid in dying under the circumstances that the public of California, through their legislators, has decided what's in the level of ethical tolerance. And what they've said to me is that people have to have a less than 6-month prognosis to live by a physical prognosis. And if somebody calls me and says that I'm done with my life, but they don't have a terminal illness, the law doesn't allow me to do that. And my beliefs go out the window, because I will be able to do, and I will do, what the people of my state have told me they're comfortable and that they can do, and they're not yet at the point of comfort with me helping people die who are not terminally ill, but who are really done with their lives. And so I answer in that context is that I am a clinician bound by clinical practice, ethics, and law, and I follow that ethical paradigm and law. And if someday the population of California or the United States decides that rational suicide, or whatever we want to call it, because you're done with your life, is in the realm, then I might or might not participate in that. But under the circumstances now, I don't think we should be doing what we have not been granted by the democracy in which we live.
Absolutely. And also, doctor, quick question on scientific evidence. Is there scientific evidence that people who are in comas indeed do not feel pain, do not experience pain?
Well, it depends on who. Yeah, for the vast majority, I think there's some truth to that. What I can tell you is this. I'm going to talk about what I know. Medical aid in dying, right? We give people 15,000 milligrams of morphine, 1,000 milligrams of Valium, and 5,000 milligrams of phenobarbital. We achieve anesthesia, right? Deep anesthesia by all the criteria. We could do surgery on you and you would not wake up. So the same question applies when you have your appendix taken out under deep anesthesia. Did you feel the pain? And there's all this philosophical, you felt it, but you forgot it, or you did feel it and you just, you're not aware. There's just all of these circumstances where we debate, do you feel pain? But the answer is that at least in what I do, I achieve anesthesia. I'm an anesthesiologist for all practical purposes at the bedside in somebody's home. And what we achieve with our medications is deep anesthesia, and by all indications that I'm aware of, you're not feeling physical pain. Now, are you spiritually off in some realm where you are understanding or deciphering or floating above your body and seeing things or feeling pain. I can't answer that. That's not in my realm of knowledge. My realm of knowledge says that I have created anesthesia as in an operating room, and as far as the knowledge base that we have, we can do surgery and people don't wake up and say, "Doc, that was the worst thing I ever experienced." They just don't remember it. And so that's where we're at with medical aid in dying.
In terms of VSED, are you an advocate?
I'm not an advocate of medical aid in dying. I'm not an advocate of anything. I'm an advocate of listening to patients. And if VSED is what they want and they get the best information they possibly can, and hopefully hospice care as it goes along with them, and hospice supports them and they get good palliative care, then sure, I'm an advocate of VSED if that patient tells me that that's what they want. I am not an advocate of medical aid in dying. I'm not an advocate of anything. I'm an advocate of listening to patients and hopefully being able to help them achieve the death that they want.
We have a hand raised from Thalia DeWolf. Also, she appears as home, I believe, on your screen. Thalia, I'm not sure if you would like to speak, to ask your question.
I think she wants to be unmuted.
Just really quick, I'm a hospice nurse now, and I was the nurse with Lonny for his practice. And I just want to remind everybody that it not only is it anesthesia, but within our prescription for anesthesia is 15,000 milligrams of morphine, which is a pain reliever. I, as a hospice nurse, give lower doses of morphine to my unconscious patients when I see signs and symptoms of pain and it is relieved. So I think there actually is evidence that people can feel pain when they're unconscious. And I think when we talk about anesthesia, there are various components, including paralytics that make you so you can't move, and medications that help you forget. But I want to remind you that within our anesthesia for medical aid and dying prescriptions is a huge dose of pain relief. That's it.
To give you, let me kick in because of the pharmacology here for a second, if I may. Just to give you some idea, the usual dose of morphine that's used for pain relief is 5 to 10 milligrams. And so listen again, 15,000 milligrams is what we use for aid in dying. It's a lot.
David Hoffman has a couple of questions. David, are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Lonny. This has been terrific. This session is kind of exactly what we created the Completed Life Initiative to address. So a quick comment about the relationship between death with dignity and medical aid in dying. My framing is that medical aid in dying is a means, dignity is an end. Is that a fair framing of the relationship between medical aid in dying and death with dignity?
Sure. I mean, medical aid in dying is a procedure where we speed up and do with comfort death, and dignity is a moral construct. And the confusion that I'm trying to talk about, and I think you're right, you're using the term dignity in the way it should be used. The problem is that I think that we as a movement, if that's what we can be called, as a political organizations, we have taken the term death with dignity and made the Death with Dignity Education Center and made Maine Death with Dignity and made the Death with Dignity law. So we have usurped the usual linguistics of the term dignity and stolen it to our cause. That's a different question.
Yeah, although I think, and I put myself in that class of advocates, both on the legislative and the judicial front, and everyone I know in this movement, and yes, referencing Arlo Guthrie's definition of a movement from Alice's Restaurant, we are a movement. Most people I know, everyone in fact that I know in this movement, view medical aid in dying as a available tool in our armamentum, and not an exclusive tool, and certainly not the best tool.
Sure, and I think that's absolutely right. Given that, if we say that death with dignity is what we're doing, then we're implying that the other tools are not dignified. So I'm just sort of advocating that we clear up the linguistic a little bit and that we give back that term to those who deserve it because we don't own it.
I would say we should reframe the term to describe the laws as providing a means that gives dignity, not an exclusive means.
Absolutely.
All right.
If you can pull
So
that off, I love it.
That's what we're working on, and working very hard. So here's my question. One of my other jobs in the Completed Life Initiative is to ask the hard questions. So let me ask the hard question about patients who would otherwise meet your criteria for both needing, wanting, and having no other viable alternative than medical aid in dying, but who, because of Huntington's disease or ALS or Parkinson's or any other condition, are neither able to bring a pill to their mouth and swallow, or even, as I like to gesture, do this to open up a roller valve on an IV tubing. How do you manage those patients?
Well, first of all, we have expanded the method. For those of you who don't know, patients must self-administer these medications. That's in all of the laws in various shapes and forms, that they must take the medication themselves, which, and David, so you know, we are working on a philosophical paper right now, and a legal paper, about the fact that we have created an underclass of patients who cannot equally access this law. And that's what you're getting to. We have ALS patients who are, and this is against the Americans with Disability Act, in my opinion. So we're sort of stuck with these. We are mandated to give people reasonable accommodation and equal access to health care by the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, and yet the aid and dying laws all say that you have to self-administer it while some people can't. And the answer is we've worked out a lot of sort of Rube Goldberg mechanical contraptions to get around that. We have added self-administration to include feeding tubes and rectal self-administration, and that's a little bit easier than swallowing. So those who have lost swallowing ability and can push a plunger or release a valve, like you said, and we have a rectal tube inserted, we can then have that be self-administration. We are not allowed to ever inject medications, so we cannot do that. We have to use the gastrointestinal tract. So the answer is that this is in evolution. The Academy, the American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid and Dying, which I chair, is actively working on this front to deal with this disability issue, but it's terrible. We have essentially told people with physically disabling diseases that they are so physically disabled that they cannot access the same health care that somebody who's able-bodied can. And so we recognize the problem. We are working actively on ways to fix it, and stay tuned.
Thank you.
In fact, some of your members, I won't mention who, some of your board members are actually in that paper that we're writing.
Yes.
Yeah, Thalia, jump in. But just before, I will just add that that Lonny, what you're mentioning as well touches upon your deep concern about the inequities within the overall sense of healthcare. Thalia, I'm not sure if you had a hand. I thought I saw a hand there. Okay, no hand. Jean, then Dean.
I did just want to say that it's, there are diseases that predict disability, but I want to say as a hospice nurse, the vast majority or a majority of my patients will be unable to swallow at some point. And that, it's not just for people with various predictably disabling diseases. So I'm just going to say it's an underclass, but it's a huge underclass of terminally ill patients.
Thank you for sharing that, and it's definitely something we will need to keep an eye on. Jean, if you're there, the floor is yours. Dean, you've had a few questions, sir. Let's get you in here.
You want me to ask something?
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, you had a couple of questions.
Well, when I'm scuba diving, the dive master's mother had Alzheimer's, and in the Netherlands, there's a way to pre-commit to euthanasia. Is this, what do you feel about Alzheimer's? Is that like the Huntington disease phenomenon or different entirely?
So the question of dementia comes up, and just so that you all know, you cannot use an advance directive as you might if you're on the way with dementia and you know you're going to have dementia and you want to refuse medical care in the future. You can declare that somebody else can make decisions. None of that applies to medical aid in dying. All the laws say that you must be able to be cognizant and clear and make the decision yourself at the moment of your death. Now, do I agree with that or not? It's irrelevant. I'm back to what I said before, which is that the law has granted me certain privileges, and I see the law as part of our democracy, and I follow those laws strictly. Do I believe that dementia, we should figure out a way to accommodate dementia at some point in time? Well, I think that's something for society to confront, because it's a very different question than what we're doing now. And I would hope that society confronts that in a way that via our democracy, that eventually we have laws that deal with demented people better. But right now, where I am, as the head of the American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid in Dying, we actually have no position on dementia because of the fact that we're clinicians who follow the laws. And we're not advocates. As I've said to Delano a few times, I don't advocate anything.
Faith Summerfield, is there a question there? Okay, Mark Peterson, was there a word you wanted to add to this as we kind of work our way towards a conclusion here? Okay.
Delano, I think Mark's feed was cut, unfortunately, so hopefully Mark can come back. But on
Okay, no worries. No worries. So Dr. Shavelson, what's the final question?
Am I not on here? Where?
Oh, wait, Faith is there. I
Faith is here,
apologize.
but am I unmuted?
Yes.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you are unmuted.
I see some other waving hands too.
Yep. We'll stick for 5 more minutes. Your other hands. So we've got you. We're here for you. So, Faith, if there's a question, please ask. Okay, let's go to Dr. Turman.
Stanley, your mic's not on.
Can you hear me now, Delano?
Yes.
There we go, Faith. Yes.
Okay, I couldn't get unmuted. So my question is for Lonnie, and I would posit that you said the
Lost your voice.
Wait, we lost you, Faith.
Okay, are you back there?
You're back.
Yes.
Okay. I think Lonnie said that the one time he would never say no is when people say I'm done, which brings me to the subject of the completed life. Now, the completed life, unless a person has a terminal illness, falls into that category, which you referred to as not yet having
We lost your audio again, Faith.
You want to hear me? I'm sorry. Where did you lose me?
There you are.
Where did you lose me?
You were winding up. We're looking for the pitch.
Okay, the pitch is our foundation is called the Completed Life, so we include those people who do not have a diagnosis of terminal illness, but they may indeed be those people who would come to you and say, I'm done. So are you doing anything about or proposing advocacy for right to physician aid in dying for people who have a completed life or experience
so
they have?
That question was asked, but let me give you a shorter version than I did last time. The question of whether the requirement for a terminal illness should be there. Canada doesn't require that. The Netherlands don't require that. The United States does require that. And so we are in a position where I, as an aid in dying doctor, if somebody says to me that I am done, my life is wonderful, I have completed it, and they use that magical phrase that I often hear, I am done, I have to say that I'm not legally able to help you because that is the position in which I work. Now, do I want you wonderful advocates where you are in the Completed Life Initiative to start arguing for that? Well, that's up to you. If you do and you want us to go the route of Canada, then you've got a political battle on your hands because our country has not been willing to move out of the realm of terminal illness for medical aid in dying. And if at some point in time they do, I may still participate or not. That's another decision. But really, that's not my decision. That's a political decision that should be made by legislators, by propositions, by people making the strongest arguments. Did What happened to my poor audio?
It just got better.
Oh,
unfortunately, there was some feedback, Lonnie. Sorry about that.
Lose everything I said. Was my life incomplete?
No, we heard everything you said.
Okay, I'm done then.
Yes. Dr. Turman and then Donna, and then I think that's going to be it. I'm so sorry. We definitely needed 2 hours today, but then I think that will constitute dinner. So let's wrap it up here.
Hey, it's breakfast. It's the breakfast in my part of the
That's
country.
right. That's right. Dr. Turman.
So, Dr. Turman, you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you, unfortunately.
And I will also add that if questions still exist well beyond this call, please feel free to reach out to us. Donna, you're up. Hello, Donna.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. I just wanted to follow up on the, I noticed that in the presentation there was one patient with ALS. And I wanted to ask Dr. Shavelson how he goes about evaluating people with Parkinson's, ALS, and other diseases like that that have, such an indefinite endpoint.
Yes. So this is a question about prognosis for people with neurodegenerative diseases. It's something we talk about in the Academy all the time, and this is a good time for me to plug the Academy, which is you can all poke around the Academy's website to understand it better. American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid and Dying. It's acamaid.org. And so this question is really common, and we actually have had sessions on the diagnostic difficulties of neurologic diseases, and that includes more diseases than you think. It's everything from multiple sclerosis to Parkinson's to ALS to PSP to all these acronyms diseases, and they're all rather vague as to when someone will die. But we're getting better at getting a sense of that, and getting to be able to measure pulmonary function and swallowing ability and frailty and loss of weight, and putting that all together in what's called a frailty index, and how often are you falling and how many bones are breaking, and you kind of add all that stuff up. It's not like cancer where you can go to an actuarial table and say the odds are such and such that this patient will live for how many months. It just doesn't work that way. But we don't give up on that. I've had Parkinson's disease patients where I have said, I just can't tell in your case. Let me come back in 2 months to get a sense of the velocity of change that's happening. I never say no to a neurologic patient that I can't tell. I always just say, I'm not sure, or I am sure. Sometimes I'm just sure. I meet people who it's really, really clear they're getting close to death. And other people who, I'm just not sure. And what I tell them, I'm with you. I got your back. Let me come back in a couple of months and see how much you're deteriorated, so I have a sense of the velocity of deterioration of your particular illness for you. And we do that with a lot of patients. We say to them, we got you, we're with you, we understand you, but you're not quite at that 6-month level yet. And then we do everything we can to bring hospice in as a consult, because they do the same 6-month prognostication. And if hospice is willing to say, yeah, we think they're close, let's put them in, then I'm willing to say, yeah, I think we'll do medical aid in dying. It is as complicated as you just said, but we're getting better at prognostication for neurodegenerative diseases. The Academy is teaching a lot about that. And our job in the Academy is we teach clinicians about the bedside care of medical aid in dying requests. And so there's my plug for the Academy. We're doing a lot of good work. We are the ones who teach. You guys all make the laws and set up the philosophy and do all that stuff. And here we are at the bedside with patients, and we are teaching how that's done and what we've learned. And that's the first time in 25 years of medical aid and dying practice that there is an organization to try to codify all this stuff, to put it all together, to taking care of patients. And thank you for your applause. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're doing good work out here.
Dr. Turman, let's try again.
Stanley, that's the first time I've seen you speechless.
Yeah, so whatever Stanley's thinking, I'm sure he will let you know about it at a later time.
I will.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us for this this afternoon session of the Completed Lunch Hour Initiative Lunch Hour Series. While we are the CLI, this conversation is only just beginning. And thank you so much, Dr. Shavelson, for sharing with us your thoughts and insights, and also for sharing with us the very exciting options which are developing as we begin to kind of think about what does it mean to kind of really live a life well lived.
One more chance?
Yes, yes, never give up.
Okay.
Never give up.
All right. 1/3 of patients die with dementia. As Lonnie said, neurological diseases, neurodegenerative diseases are not very predictable. I've been working for over 15 years on developing not just a living will, but strategies to add to that living will that will compel physicians at best, persuade them at least, hopefully, to honor the requests in a living will to stop. And I don't call it voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, because there's nothing voluntary, and they're not eating and drinking. They're being fed by someone sticking a spoon in their mouth, which is an invasive event. So I think that if you need 2 hours to talk about MAID and you're not done, you probably need 4 to talk about dementia. Thank you for giving me 3 chances to say my little pitch.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you, Delano, and thank you so much, Dr. Lonny Shavelson. It's been a tremendous honor to have you join us on our program today at the Completed Life Initiative. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone in the audience for your incredible questions, as always. Just a round of applause to your presentation today, Lonny, and it's so great to see all of your wonderful faces on the screen today. And coming up next, I just want to make a plug for our next upcoming event this coming Tuesday, April 13th, which will feature a panel discussion with Katie Engelhardt, a journalist who just wrote a great book called The Inevitable: Dispatches on the Right to Die, she will be joined in conversation by Peggy Batten and Dr. Timothy Quill. So please don't miss it. Registration is available on our website, www.completedlife.org. We look forward to seeing you at that event and our other upcoming future events. So be well, take care, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Great job, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to hear you, Stanley.